Traditionally, Atlantic Canada has been fertile territory for the Liberals. In 2015, they won all the seats and held most of them in 2019. Going into this election, in New Brunswick, the Liberals had 7 seats and the Conservatives had 3. In Nova Scotia, of the 11 ridings, the Liberals had them all but 1. In Prince Edward Island, all 4 seats were Liberal. The last time they elected a Conservative was 2008. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, 6 of the 7 seats were Liberal, with 1 NDP in St. John's East.
We just had an election in 2019, so we constitutionally don't have to have another election for, well, fixed election dates 4 years, Constitution 5 years, so we're well outside of that time frame. So we don't need to have that election. We're still coming out of the pandemic. It's a tough sell to say this is a time that we absolutely need to have an election, and I think that will be one of the challenges for the Liberals.
So although things look good for the Liberals now, and they have a, by and large, in most people's estimation, a successful record through the pandemic, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot about. It nevertheless, things could change and things could be more competitive by election day.
I think the Liberals will run on their record of managing COVID-19. We've obviously seen the popularity of some provincial governments be hurt by, however they responded to the pandemic. But even though I think there was concern with the Liberal strategy earlier in 2021, now that they can point to these graphs showing that Canadians are going to pass most of the other developed countries in terms of vaccination rates, that I think that's what they'll run on. And then they'll turn on saying, and we are the best to manage the post-COVID economy. And I think that's where it gets into debating with the Tories, that the Conservative Party will, they'll say whatever they want about the Liberal response, which they've already started doing. But I don't know how, effective that argument will be. Where there might be more space for them is simply managing the economy going forward, like trying to move past the discussion of COVID-19, because the fact that the Liberals have either maintained their support or gone up a bit during the last few months, and the Tories are starting to, lose support, would suggest generally that Canadians, on the most part, well, close to the majority, or the 40% that can get a party a majority, are supporting what the Liberals are doing.
And certainly Justin Trudeau isn't going through this without critics. I mean, it probably wouldn't take a lot for people to change a vote against the Prime Minister, because he is perceived as arrogant and he is sort of perceived as self-absorbed. But you always need an alternative to boot a government out. And right now, at least on Prince Edward Island, I'm not sure we're seeing that.
I know everyone had to make tough but necessary decisions when it came to the pandemic and your borders. Well, it's paid off because PEI has been an extraordinary leader in your pandemic response.
There's only one party who will stand up for Newfoundland and Labrador workers, Canada's Conservatives. We will have your back.
In late July, it was pretty obvious there was going to be an election call. Party leaders were making swings through Atlantic Canada with announcements and promises setting the stage for campaign messaging.
It is wonderful to be back on the rock. I want the people of Newfoundland and Labrador to take a hard look at the political parties out there and assess who will be there to defend your jobs. The Trudeau Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens have time and time again failed to stand up for offshore energy industry and its workers. These parties also oppose important economic and cultural aspects of Newfoundland and Labrador, like the seal hunt, and they do not understand the importance of the fishery.
Now, do you think O'Toole's message that he delivered in July about the financial stabilization and criticizing Liberals, saying that they'd abandoned the oil and gas sector, are those messages, do you think, will they resonate with Newfoundland and Labradorians?
You know, I certainly I think people here are very concerned about oil and gas, and see it as a, maybe a waning part of our, economic, of our economy and of future economic growth, but nevertheless still important and likely to be with us for a long time. So I think that kind of message has potential, but I think that the Liberals are, putting themselves in a position to say, we have your back, with these, multi-billion-dollar announcements, about Muskrat Falls, for instance. So, I think that there certainly are conservative voters here, and the Conservatives did much better in 2019 than they did in 2015. I think they almost tripled their numbers. I mean, that was after they were truly in the wilderness. So they're in a more competitive position than they were. But I don't have the sense that the Liberals face a very serious threat out here.
I can announce that we've landed agreements with the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador that will ensure financial sustainability of the project while protecting people from major electricity increases. There's always more work to be done, but we're confident that this agreement is a big step in the right direction.
Muskrat Falls has been the #1 issue facing Newfoundlanders and Labradorians now for well over a decade. Everywhere I've gone across this beautiful province, it is the pervasive issue. Whether it's a new mother or a retiree, a pensioner, they all ask, what are we going to do about Muskrat Falls? Will my rates actually double? I can't afford it. I can't afford childcare. I can't afford to pay an extra $200, $300 a month on my electricity bill.
Dealing with the Muskrat Falls situation gives this province a lot more breathing room and a lot more options for coping with the fiscal challenges that we have right now. So it's really a huge deal for the Liberal government to have come in to save the day. Now, like I said, I think that I've been expecting this to happen for a long time in one way or another, and they've been telegraphing it for a long time. They have been delaying really announcing the commitment, obviously, until an election was imminent, which I think is very telling about how campaign politics works and how you win elections. But yeah, nevertheless, it's a big deal.
Hi, Jack Harris. How's it going? Very good. Just looking for support here for the election. You guys in St. John's East?
In 2019, the only riding in Newfoundland and Labrador the Liberals didn't win was St. John's East. Jack Harris has held the seat for the NDP off and on since 1987, but he's not running this time, so the seat is highly sought after by everyone.
Jack Harris is a popular and really well-known figure in this province, and especially in this city. And I think he's going to be hard to replace. I think that the fact that the NDP was able to win back that seat after losing it when the province was swept in 2015, I think is to some degree down to Jack Harris. Having said that, I think it'll be a competitive race, especially if the NDP can put forward a strong candidate.
Prince Edward Island is the only province in Atlantic Canada where the Liberals hold all the seats and have since 2015. Only occasionally over the years have the Conservatives won a seat.
How'd your meeting go the other night? Good.
Wayne Easter has been the Malpeque MP for 28 years. He's decided to retire, so the seat is open.
The issue that Conservatives have on Prince Edward Island is one of perception of the federal party. There's a strong candidate that running there, Jody Sanderson. A lack of incumbency makes the riding, you would think, more competitive. It looks like Heath MacDonald, a former provincial cabinet minister, will get the nomination. he's got to be favored going into the race. But it's the type of riding, too, where if the ebb and flow of the election changes to, say, the benefit of the Conservatives federally, you know, that might be a riding that you could see something happen, as could Charlottetown.
Hopefully next time I'll be able to stay longer.
Liberal Sean Casey has represented Charlottetown riding since 2011, but this time around he's up against a strong Conservative candidate. Doug Curry is a former Liberal provincial cabinet minister, but has switched to the Conservatives.
I think what Doug Curry needs to do is make the election about Doug Curry and Doug Curry's record, and have as little a conversation about the federal Conservative Party, the federal leader, and social conservatism, which, frankly, a lot of island progressive conservatives find a little too right-wing for their liking.
Does Curry risk having been a Liberal and then switching to the Conservatives? Is that a little bit of
Well,
baggy?
Doug Curry will say his family is traditionally conservative, so he will say he went from conservative to Liberal and he's back home.
In New Brunswick, depending on the riding, voters tend to flip back and forth between Liberals and Conservatives. In 2019, of the 10 seats, the Liberals won 6, the Conservatives 3, and the Greens made an historic breakthrough in Fredericton.
I actually see most of the seats staying the same, except for 3 key ridings to watch. To me, and I think to other observers, the key ridings to watch are St. John Rossay, the Fredericton riding, and Miramichi.
Fredericton in late July is usually a busy time, but with COVID protocols and travel restrictions still in place, it's pretty quiet. However, things are about to heat up, with an election campaign expected to be extremely close.
So I'm Jenica, I'm the candidate.
Yeah.
And we're just canvassing the neighborhood today.
Okay.
In 2019, Jenica Atwin made history by getting elected as a Green MP in Fredericton, the first one outside of British Columbia. It gave the Greens a real boost.
In past, we had difficulty. We were looked upon as a wasted vote, 2015. And people are always concerned about that. Well, if I waste my vote with you guys, then the Conservatives or the other party may get in. I think that's changed. Now we're the strategic vote. We proved in 2019 that we're not a wasted vote. We're a contender.
You can see by the size of my smile how excited I am today to introduce you to the newest member of the National Liberal Caucus, the Member of Parliament for Fredericton, Jenica Atwin.
Jenica Atwin made history again when she decided to leave the Green Party and cross the floor to sit as a Liberal. And at the same time, the Liberals said she would be their Fredericton candidate.
It's a good day. I think this is a positive thing for my community. And the past month I've been at a crossroads. It's been, in a word, distracting. And so I'm going where I can do my best work on behalf of my community and for the people that I care so deeply about.
I think it's a given. We were pretty shocked and saddened by it. We were a very close team, including Jenica. So it hit us pretty hard.
It was so close in 2019 where the Liberal incumbent finished 3rd. So Atwin's taking over the nomination of a party that they held the seat, but then they finished 3rd in 2019. It was the Conservative candidate that finished 2nd, and then now we wait to see, actually by the time you hear this, and you have the Green candidate who, that's a part, Fredericton is part of the province where the provincial riding of David Kuhn is. So they have 3 seats now provincially, and that's where all the momentum of the Green brand comes from, I would argue, out of the province, is in that. That's the riding of UNB Fredericton campus, St. Thomas University, the provincial legislature. So it'll be a tight 3-way battle for sure.
In 2015, Pat Finnegan was well known in Miramichi Grand Lake as Mr. Tomato, a successful greenhouse operator who ran for the Liberals. He defeated the Conservative incumbent and then was re-elected in 2019. He's decided not to run again, and a couple of former provincial cabinet ministers have stepped up to try to replace him.
We have former Progressive Conservative Cabinet Minister Jake Stewart running for the Conservatives, and the Liberals will have a strong candidate as well, former Cabinet Minister Lisa Harris. So, I mean, you have the battle of two cabinet ministers.
On a Saturday in July, the St. John's City Market would normally be packed cheek to jowl, but not this day.
I mean, COVID has its ups and downs. We were one of the lucky ones. We were able to stay open the whole time. We were deemed essentials, but because we sell groceries and food, so we did okay during COVID. Some of these other little stalls, little restaurants, they've had a little tougher time, that's for sure. As for today, I think, it is what it is.
The impact of COVID has been felt by businesses across New Brunswick, but nowhere more than in St. John. It's one of the most popular East Coast destinations for cruise ships, and there hasn't been a ship in port in almost 2 years, and there won't be any until May of 2022. That represents a loss of $68 million per year.
I would love to see candidates and some of the election recognize that we are singled out. There is no other sector in tourism or any other sector that is basically in lockdown until 2022. There is no one else who has said your industry can't make any revenue until 2022. Cruise is closed. So I think with that recognition needs to come, we can't survive without some of that funding, some of that support, because we have no opportunity to generate any cruise revenue because of this lockdown.
In St. John Rothsay, I mean, this is a part of the province where even in provincial elections, there can be some unexpected results. We've had close races between the Liberals and the Tories federally. But we had, so in 2015, Wayne Long won the seat away from Rodney Weston. They had the rematch in 2019. The vote margin tightened. Rodney Weston is not running for the Tories again, but former Mayor Mel Norton is. So you have two well-known, obviously Wayne Long as the incumbent, but then the Tories have a candidate who is well-known. This will be a great test on, the local MP's popularity. I think generally New Brunswick voters will have similar concerns to voters in other provinces. There could be issues, federal issues around the border, around regulation of cruises, because parts of the province rely so heavily on tourism. Those could end up being issues that are talked about on the campaign. But I still think generally the voters will be looking at, management of or response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then management of the economy going forward, and then also larger issues that I imagine would come up out of the campaign, relations with Indigenous peoples, long-term care, the healthcare system in general. I think New Brunswickers will have the same concerns.
In Halifax and the rest of Nova Scotia, the Liberals pretty much have a stranglehold on seats. They have 10, while the Conservatives have only 1. Jeff Regan's not reoffering in Halifax. Does that open up the possibility for the NDP to win back a seat in a city that they once have held seats in?
Yeah, so the NDP, I think, always has the capacity to build in Halifax because we've seen they've been able to do it, particularly when the NDP is doing well as a party. I think what we're seeing right now is that the NDP might be on kind of an upswing, and maybe that upswing could translate into a few hundred extra votes in a Halifax riding, and maybe that makes a difference, because when we're talking about an incumbent not reoffering, there's always an incumbent advantage that comes along with a seat. And so when that incumbent does leave, there is a unique opportunity for new candidates to take advantage of that. So if you have an upswing with the NDP, if you're running against somebody who isn't an incumbent, then that kind of, those few hundred votes can make a difference in a close riding. So I wouldn't put that out of the realm of possibility.
There are few specifically local issues that are expected to influence how people vote in Atlantic Canada. However, there is one national issue that could play a role. In the Maritimes, there was only one residential school where Indigenous children were sent from across the region. It was at Shubenacadie in Nova Scotia. Over 1,000 Mi'kmaq children lived there during its 37 years of operation. Today, it's the site of a plastics factory. When unknown graves were discovered in other parts of the country, the ground here was x-rayed, but to date, no bodies have been found.
So Gwe, Waliexikbu, hello, good morning. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today.
First Nations leaders across the Maritimes are speaking out and encouraging people to hold politicians to account and require them to address a whole range of Native issues.
Trudeau, like when he was, he got a lot of support from First Nations across the country. And I'd almost go and say that, like, you know, without them, he wouldn't have gotten where he got. But a lot of it was around like building a relationship with the First Nations. And it's an important relationship. And the implementation of our treaty rights and benefits, like the rights are there. It's the implementation that we're struggling with, right? So I'll be looking for that. And for how are they going to address this whole residential school legacy? Because, you know, we thought we had it addressed before. They thought that it was addressed before, but it hasn't been because there's children in unmarked graves, right? And how is that going to be addressed on a federal level?
The broader Indigenous issues with the residential schools and the finding of the burials and that seems to have raised the profile of First Nations issues. Do you think that'll play at all in the campaign?
I think certainly public awareness may be at an all-time high, and I think the average citizen is more likely today than at any point in history to understand what residential schools did to Indigenous peoples and the intergenerational trauma that has continued. That is something that even when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its final report in 2015 and there was that moment of awareness, I don't think it really sunk in the same way that the realization of these unmarked graves, mass graves, has struck people. So I do think that this will be more of a conversation as part of this election.
Polls have closed. We want to see early what's starting to happen in Atlantic Canada.
Atlantic Canada is always the first to report results on election night. The Liberals have tended to come out of the region with strong results. The Conservatives always hope to win a handful of seats, while the NDP and Greens consider it a success if they can get one seat each.
I think the Liberals will be running on their record, and particularly their record during the pandemic. I think that you know, by and large, Canadians have been satisfied, and I think objectively, you know, the federal government has, you know, certainly avoided some of the challenges that provincial governments have faced in terms of rolling out, say, the vaccinations on the ground, apart from the sort of period when we were you know, concerned about supply of vaccine. Once that got solved, essentially it's all been provincial governments who've really, you know, been struggling with the rollout and who have been, you know, in Ontario especially, for example, have been it seems to be the target of blame, whereas the federal government, not so much.
I think they've done a good enough job that most people would be comfortable having them continue with what they're doing. And there might be an expectation that even if you had a different party in power, maybe the decisions that they would make would be similar to the Liberals. And some of the things that rolled out that didn't go as well as they would want were ultimately outside of the Liberal Party's control. So my thought is criticisms aren't going to stick that much, but I really have nothing to compare it to. So it's kind of an instinct more than anything.
What's your overall sense at the end of the election here in PEI for Liberals again?
Well, we've only elected one Conservative since 1988. So it doesn't take a person much to go out on a limb and say, chances are we'll have four. But we have elections for a reason, and there's enough sort of variables at play here that it is possible that the Tories could slip one, but they need a lot of dominoes to fall in their favor during the campaign, I think, to give Islanders enough confidence to turn their vote from Liberals to Conservative.
I think the story of New Brunswick is, for the Liberals, is say if they are this popular, or if this popularity is increasing, can they get close to 2015, where they swept the province? And I would say the answer is no. I think that some of those ridings that went Liberal in 2015 that were national news, because in some cases they hadn't gone Liberal since, World War II. Fundy Royal, which is just east of St. John, New Brunswick Southwest, which is just west of St. John, so in the southwestern corner of the province. I mean, it's very difficult to imagine those flipping back Liberal like they did in 2015.
The rest of the province, I don't think, is nearly as nearly as winnable for anyone other than the Liberal Party. But of course, time will tell. But I think it's really just St. John's East. This is where the race is in this province. Yeah.
And I don't think there's much indication to think that's going to change drastically. It really would be change along the edges, if anything. I think what we'll see is certainly most seats remaining Liberal.